This is our coffin display room where we have, generally speaking, a little short of 40 coffins on display. When a family come in and make their funeral arrangements, generally speaking, the last thing they do before they leave the funeral home is to pick out a coffin. So we bring them down here and let them decide which coffin they prefer to use. Sometimes when they come in, they'll have an idea in their head of what coffin they actually wish to get, or the person who passed away may have left wishes that they want a particular type of coffin. And if they have, then obviously they don't need to come down here and have a look at coffins. But if they do, I think it's nice for them to come in, see what coffins are available, and decide for themselves then which one they prefer. Everyone has their own taste, their own individual taste. There's something that they like or they dislike. So I think to actually see them and pick out something that you think is maybe appropriate. I'm not sure if there's such a thing as a nice coffin, but something that maybe is appropriate for the person who has passed away. When I took over from my dad, we used to have several coffin suppliers. And of course the debate would always be between different coffin suppliers and the quality and the finish on the coffins. But at the time I had two coffins which had been in the store where we kept coffins at the time for a long period of time. And they had got a bit damp. So I asked one particular supplier if by any chance he would take them back to his factory and respray them and give them back to me. So the following time he visited, he arrived on with two new coffins and took away the two old ones. So of course this gained serious favour with me, and I've dealt with that supplier from that day to this, which is probably a little over 40 years ago. I remember one time a family, and we only had two coffins in stock because it was around January and we were after being very, very busy. So the family came in to make their funeral arrangements, and I was a bit embarrassed because all we had was two coffins in this room here. So I was hoping in a way that they would say to me that the person had decided on a particular type of coffin, or say, look, Eamon, pick it out yourself. But no, they decided that they wanted to see coffins. So I was then quite embarrassed, and I said to them, I'm really, really sorry. It's after being terribly, terribly busy, and all I have is two coffins. And they smiled and looked at each other and said, Eamon, we just want one. But if they had awaited, there was actually a delivery of coffins coming that afternoon. But they decided no, that they would look at the two coffins that we had, and they picked out one from that. I remember another family who decided that their mum had passed away, and they decided that they would have prayers that evening. So they rang me in the morning, maybe at a little after 8, and told me that their mum had passed away. And I remembered vividly that when their dad passed away, they had a particular type of coffin that I now didn't have in stock. So I phoned the supplier and I asked him, is there any chance I could get one of those coffins, or do you know someone who has one? And they said, leave it with me, and they'd come back to me in a few minutes. So they did, in fairness to them, rang back within a quarter of an hour and said, we don't have one of those coffins. And they said, what time do you need it? And I said, we had prayers that evening at 9 o'clock, so I would need it before that. And I was also busy that day, so I hadn't time to go to Cork and get a coffin from them. So they said, don't worry, we will have it in your funeral home at 6 or half 6 this evening. And I said, that's absolutely perfect, because it'll be that before I've all my bits and pieces sorted. So they arrived on at half 6 with the coffin, and I noticed there was quite a smell of lacquer from the coffin. So I asked the guy who brought it on to me, I said, there's a fierce smell of lacquer off that coffin. And he said, that's because we only made it for you today, Eamon. He said, the production in the factory was stopped, and this coffin was made for you, and it's now here. And for them to bring it to me, it was a little over a 3-hour drive. So that was the kind of service that you get because you stick, I suppose, with the one supplier over the years. And I know when I built the funeral home that money was very, very scarce, and I owed a big debt to this particular supplier. And in fairness to him, he phoned me and he said, Eamon, would you please stay dealing with me? And in a few years, we will get rid of this debt, and together we'll march on, as they say. And in fairness, I stuck with him. We got through it. I think at the time, I remember it took me maybe 2 or 3 years to get through it and to get to pay him, eventually get up to date with my payments with him. And I've stuck with him, and he has supplied me ever since. I've never actually bought a coffin anywhere else. And I suppose I thought that bad times would never come again, but of course they did. And different things happen in your personal life, which means puts a strain maybe on your finances. And each time I had to rely on them, and each time they had no issue. They supported me, helped me, and made sure that I had coffins at all times, no matter what was going on in either my personal life or my business life. And I suppose everybody in life goes through different ups and downs, but if you have somebody like that that supports you, you don't forget it. At least I certainly wouldn't. I think it was a really, really nice thing to do. We generally allow our families to come into this room. We warn them before they come in that it's a room full of coffins rather than a brochure. For some reason, sometimes people expect that we're going to show them a brochure. But when they walk into this room full of coffins, they get a little bit of a surprise maybe first, but then they're quite impressed that they have such a display and such a choice. We feel that it's nice for a family to have a choice. Okay, a coffin is not something that you want to pick out or you want to have to buy, but when you do have to buy it or need to buy it, I think it's nice that you have a good, decent choice, that you're left to your own devices to pick out whatever coffin you wish. Each coffin is individually marked price-wise, and the only time that we would influence a family or make any influence on them is if a person needed a little more room in the coffin. So if they needed maybe, we thought that the person that passed away needed maybe a taller coffin or a wider coffin, we might influence them then and say to them, you know, that maybe you need to go in this direction or that direction. And sometimes when a family come in, the person has already made their wishes, has said to them what coffin they wish. So that eases that burden on them. Sometimes then a family may look for something that's not actually in the room here, so we will do our best to get it for them. Generally speaking, we can get it for them very quickly. We'll get it for them before their funeral service takes place. The factory, as I said, are very, very good. They're great to supply us. They're great to get us anything that we wish, even if it's a special order. They're very good to put it together for us. And we appreciate that, and I appreciate that. And I think the fact that they stood by me over the years, I've always stood by them. And I think that is to everyone's benefit, long term.